In today's video, I'm going to teach you a great tech stack for sending emails in Node.js. The tech stack that we're going to learn is the one that I use at my company to send emails to hundreds and thousands of users every single day, but it will also be a solid foundation for a simple side project. Email is one of those topics that seems like it should be simple, but there is actually a bit of complexity to getting it set up and working well. In this video, we're going to look at 4 core technologies that are going to help us with everything from designing the emails to actually sending them out in production. These technologies are Node Mailer, which we will use to actually send the emails, mjml, which gives us responsive email design and makes our emails compatible with Outlook out of the box, handlebars, which we can use to make our mjml templates dynamic, and finally, Amazon SES, which is a cloud-based SMTP provider which we can use to actually send our emails in production. If we combine all these 4 technologies, then we've got a really solid foundation for sending really well-designed emails to a lot of users in our production applications. If you want to see what we're going to be building, then I have a repository featuring the final product. I'm not going to go too deep into the design in this tutorial, but we will build something with a bit of complexity to it that you can see on the screen here. This is completely compatible with legacy providers like Outlook. It also works on mobile. And once you understand how to build something like this, there won't be too many steps to take your design to the next level. We'll make a new directory, Node.js Node Mailer tutorial, and then I will open that up in VS Code. Okay, I'm going to start a simple Node.js project, so npm init with the yes flag, and we're going to install a handful of dependencies. So we're going to install the AWS SDK for an SES client, handlebars, mjml, and Node Mailer. I also want to make this a TypeScript project because I think that is now the industry standard for a Node.js app. So let's add some dev dependency to support that. We want to install types for mjml, Node Mailer. We'll also run our project with nodemon and tsnode. And finally, we need TypeScript itself. We'll need a tsconfig file, so I'll use the npx tsc init command to generate some of that. And finally, we'll go to our package.json file and create a new script to run our application. So instead of test, we'll have a start script. We'll put our root file in source, index.ts, and we'll also specify that file in main. So let's make that file now. We'll make a new source directory and cd into it, and then we will create an index.ts. So sometimes when we're designing a new pattern, it's useful to think about what we want the end code to look like that our maintainers are going to be calling. So in my case, I want to create a simple API where we're asking our maintainers to supply the bare minimum options needed to send an email. Quickly create an asynchronous main function so we can run our async code, and let's call it at the bottom. I want users to call something like this. We'll have an email service, then we'll choose a template, so let's say onboarding. Then we'll have a send function on that template, and that can accept a to parameter, which is whoever you want to send the email to. Then you can pass in some variables for your template, and we'll support options for more advanced use cases here. And this will be asynchronous. So this is kind of what I want to build. We're getting a lot of errors and warnings because of course this doesn't exist yet, but this is how I want our code to be called in the end. So now that we know what we're aiming for, we can start coding. So we'll create a services directory. Then in that we'll create an email directory. And then in here, the first thing we need to create is a transporter, which is a client that we're going to use to actually send our emails. So let's create a file called transporter.ts. And in here, we're going to pass 2 different kinds of configs. For testing, we're going to use a service called Ethereal Email, which doesn't actually send emails, but it will give us previews, and that's what we'll mainly be using. But I'll also show you how you can connect to Amazon SES for production. So if we import everything from the Node Mailer package and also everything from our SES package. It's the client SES library. And to keep our code neat, I'll put everything in a function. So we'll have a synchronous function, get transporter. And based on the node end environment variable, we'll determine whether to use the production Amazon SES credentials or the development ethereal preview. So if process.env.nodeenv equals production, then we'll do the SES transporter. Otherwise, we'll do ethereal, and at the bottom, we'll export our transporter. We'll start with ethereal. So we'll use NodeMailer's create transport function, and we just need to send a series of configs. Copilot has guessed the code we need correctly, but instead of using process M for the user and pass, we can just use a user and pass that I've grabbed directly from the ethereal site. And this should work fine. For SES, there are a few more steps. So first we need to create an SES object, const SES equals new AWS. And this is going to take an API version. We'll use the 2010 one. For region, I'm in EU West 2. And credentials. And to keep TypeScript happy, we can fall back to a string if the credentials are unavailable. Once we have that, we can simply call create transport and return our SES object as well as AWS. Next, I want to create a base email class because a lot of the functionality that we need is going to be shared between all of our emails. So we can avoid repeating ourselves by using a pattern like this. Let's create a base.ts file. And we're going to create an abstract class that we can extend from. So let's export an abstract class of base email. This is going to accept a generic type depending on the variables that we need for an individual email. So I'll call that T. And then we'll define some properties for this class. So in general, I think our from address is going to be consistent. So we can put that here. That's a string. We'll have a subject. Now this could be a string, but I also think we may want to inject dynamic variables into our subject, and to handle this, we can make subject either a string or a callback function. So if it's a callback function, it'll accept an argument of variables, which has type T, and it will return a string. And then finally, we'll have a template, and this will just be a string. So all of these properties will need to be provided when somebody creates a new email class. To make that work, we need a constructor, and Copilot knows exactly what to do. Perfect. Next, we're going to write a send function. This is the one thing that all our emails need to share. There's going to be a lot of repeated code, so this is the perfect place to do it. So this will be a public asynchronous function, send, and based on the pattern that we spoke about at the beginning, we'll need a to argument, which is a string, a variables argument, which will be our generic type T, and finally, an optional options argument. And this will be of type NodeMailer send mail options. So I'll quickly add that at the top. Now in the send function, the first thing we want to do is grab our mjml template for the specific email. So if I import the fs library, and we'll use the promises version so we can await our read file, then const mjml equals await fs read file, and we'll read the template path that's been provided. Now we want to compile our mjml so that all the dynamic and conditional content becomes static. So we'll say const compiled mjml equals, now we can call handlebars compile mjml, and then we can turn this mjml into HTML using a function from the mjml library. So const HTML equals mjml to HTML, pass in our compiled code and add .html on the end. To actually send this email, we'll use the transporter we created in the last file. So if we await transporter.sendMail, then we already have the to argument. From can be taken from the properties of the class. Subject will either be the subject itself if it's a string, or it'll be a function and we'll call it with variables. Like so. Then we'll pass in the HTML we created above. And finally, if someone wants to add any particular options to the transporter or override any of the values above, we've given them a way to do that. So we'll just spread the options object, and that gives people complete control when they need it. To help our development, I'll add a couple of logs. So when this code completes, we will add an info console message sent, and I'll add the message ID. And I realize I'm missing the info argument. And for Ethereal, we're going to get links to email previews. So we can say const preview URL equals, and then there is a function get test message URL. And if there's a preview URL, we can log that as well. So that's our base email. And now we can start creating our individual emails and their templates. I'm going to create a templates folder. And then in this tutorial, we'll make two emails. So I'll make an onboarding email and a referral email. And each of those folders will have an index.ts file and a template.mjml file. Let's start with onboarding. I'm going to write a very basic mjml template. mjml looks a lot like HTML. There are certain HTML components that don't work so well in email, and that's when we're going to use the mjml equivalents. Then for dynamic content, we're using handlebars, and that means two curly braces and the name of our dynamic variable. For dynamic URLs, it works exactly the same. So we'll have an href, we'll open double quotes as usual, but inside those, we'll have our handlebars syntax. We'll pass in a login URL. That's a very simple template, but how do we link this up with the work we've done so far? If we go into the index file for this template, we can import the base email from our base file. We'll want to have some variables for our email. So let's have an interface, onboarding email variables, and we need a first name and a login URL. We want to create a class for each email, and this is going to be extended from the abstract base email class. So I'm going to export a class of onboarding email, which will extend the base email. And then we had our generic type T. So in here, we can pass the onboarding variables. Let's rename that to onboarding email variables. And then in here, we'll call a constructor, and we'll use the super function. And what that does is it passes anything into the constructor of the parent class. So in this case, the super function passes the arguments into the constructor of base email. So this expects a from, and this will be hello@example.com, a subject, welcome to my app, and a template. And I'll use the Node.js join library to make sure our path is formatted correctly. So path.join, we'll get the directory, and then we are looking for template mjml. So we need to import path from path. We're getting an error because I've supplied the arguments in an object, but I think I prefer that pattern. So if we go back into the base email, let's make these arguments go into an object of their own, and then we'll destructure from subject template. And the error's gone. Now we'll do the same for the referral email. So referral template mjml. We've already written some mjml, so I'll simply copy something in this time. As for the index file, we'll do something very similar. We'll import path and base. We'll have referral email variables. This time we're expecting a referrer object with a first name and a last name, and also a login URL. And as before, we'll create a new class and extend it from the base email. This time, I want our subject to contain some dynamic content. So instead of using a string, we can use our callback function pattern that we created earlier. So subject has our variables, but we can destructure these and get the referrer, and then return a string, referrer first name has invited you, and then we need our template, which follows the exact same pattern as before. So quite quickly, we've got two simple emails, and we're almost ready to try and send them and see the previews in Ethereal. There's just a bit of work to wire everything together. So if I go back into my email folder, we'll create an index.ts file. And in here, we'll create our email service. This will have a property onboarding, which will be a new onboarding email. And likewise, referral, which is a new referral email. And I want this service to be a singleton. So we'll export one instance of this class. Export const email equals a new email service. Now all that's left is to run our function. So back in our root file, let's see if we've delivered on the pattern that we wanted. If I uncomment this and import email, and then I change my variables so that we have a first name and a login URL, we won't supply any options. TypeScript looks happy, so let's now run the app. I just realized there was a mistake in my package.json script. We forgot to add TS Node. So now if we run npm run start, then we have an email with a preview URL. And if I open that up, we can see our email. Next, I want to demonstrate some of the power of mjml and handlebars by taking the design a little bit further. So on the right, I've got a design that I prepared in Figma, and now we're going to talk through how to create it in mjml. So I'm inside the referral template. One of the first things that's occurred to me is that there could be a lot of repetition because we have a lot of the same text component. But mjml has a way to handle this, and that's with the mj head element. So if we add mj head, then inside this we can specify attributes. And this is really useful for repeated styles. So in our case, we want to have an mj text component. And as we have a couple of buttons, we can do something similar for those. Now for most of the body, this is going to look very similar to what we did earlier, so I'm going to copy in some code I prepared before. A slightly more interesting part of this template is the features section, because we only want to show it if there's at least one feature, and we also want to support an arbitrary amount of features. So to do that, we'll use conditional and looping logic that handlebars provides. So first, we can use a hash symbol and if, and features.length will mean that if there is a feature, then it shows, but if there's none, this whole section gets skipped. We can close this section with a / and if. This section has a unique background color. Then we specify a column. To loop through our features, we will use the each keyword. So again, hash, then each features. For the feature title, and we use the keyword this to access the individual objects in the array. And then we'll have this dot description. And we can close off this block with / each. Before we run this and check what it looks like, we just need to update the types in our index.ts. So this is in the referral template. Everything remains the same, except we also now have an optional array of features. This is optional, and each feature is an object containing a name and a description. Now, if we go back to our main function, we can pass in some variables and see how close we got to the final result. I just noticed that the type here should be title instead of name. That's what I get for trusting Copilot too much. Now, to send our email, if we go back to our main function, we can call email.referral, send. Then we need to add a referrer. And we also need to add features. Let's then open up a terminal and we can run npm run start. And if I bring this email across, you can see that it looks very close to our original design. What if we only want to show one feature? We can comment out these two, run npm run start. And there we have just one feature. What if we don't have any features? So I can delete this whole variable, run our project again. And this time, there's no features section at all. So hopefully this is a good demonstration of how handlebars helps us take our emails to the next level and do more complex things than if we were simply working with static templates. So when you combine all these pieces, then you have a really solid foundation for sending emails in a production-grade Node.js app. To finish off, I'll show you sending a production email using AWS. So back in our package JSON, we can have a start production script where we pass in a node env of production. If you set up AWS before, then you likely have the credentials you need in the root in a folder called .aws. So if I cd into root/.aws, inside there we've got a config and a credentials file. If you open up the credentials file, you can see my fake credentials on the screen. Then we could add these to the environment variables on our local development machine. So we can export, we'll turn the keys into all caps, and I can run this in the terminal. Then make sure to start a new terminal and we can run yarn start production. So we've sent our message and I've opened it up in my Outlook account and it looks exactly as we expect. If we hadn't used a framework like mjml, it would probably be a different story because Outlook requires a bunch of vendor-specific code just to make things like buttons that look acceptable. So mjml has really helped us out here. So I hope you found this tutorial useful. As I said at the beginning, these are technologies that I use to send emails to hundreds of thousands of users at my work, but also in personal side projects. So it's a really solid foundation whether your project is small or your project is really big. If you want to understand more about any of the technologies mentioned in this video, I've put some links in the description to their official documentation. I've also written an article version of this tutorial that you can check out, and it goes into a little bit more detail about things like applying to Amazon SES and getting production access there. I'm pretty new to YouTube, so if you found this video helpful, it would really help me out if you left a like or a comment or a subscribe. I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions, and that's all for now. Thanks very much and see you in the next video.